All right. On to our final topic of the day, Ahsoka, episode 5. Now, spoiler alert, I guess, right at the top. Um, I'm gonna ask you first. What are your thoughts on the episode and the series so far?
Well, we didn't do a podcast for episode 4. And I'll say episode 4 was the first episode of the show so far where I finished and I'm like I want to watch that again. And I watched it
Wow.
again like maybe a couple days later. This was the first episode where I finished watching. Episode 5 was the first episode where I finished watching, and right after I finished watching, I'm like I want to watch that again. Uh, I had so much fun with this with episode 5. I thought it was great. I thought it was the best episode of the show so far. Um, and also it was directed by Dave Filoni, so a lot of my
Yep. A
complaints,
lot of your
yeah,
negative criticism of Dave Filoni out the window, bud.
out the window. He did an awesome job with the fight choreography. I thought the flashbacks were just incredibly cool. Seeing this much of the spoiler alert, seeing this much of Hayden Christensen felt really great. Another thing I'll bring up right after watching episode 4 is not only did I want to watch the episode again, but I went and watched Phantom Menace, which is my go-to anytime
Oh,
I'm in the mood for Star Wars. I watch Phantom Menace, even though it's not my
really?
favorite. It's just it's the one I've seen the most. And I love that movie so much. And this episode is just it's so great because I watched that before watching this episode. So seeing young Anakin, um, and seeing older Anakin still showing training as like a Force ghost kind of situation, it's something I've always wanted out of Star Wars. After Return of the Jedi, uh, especially the recut when they put Hayden Christensen as a Force ghost around Luke, I always wanted to see, a young Jedi go into a temple and see like an Anakin Skywalker and learn from him, or see an Qui Gon and learn from him. It's something that I thought we might have seen with Rey, maybe on like the Sith level. That
Mhm.
was something that did happen with the original Jason Solo kind of stuff. So there's so much stuff that happened in this episode that I thought was really interesting. The flashbacks I thought were great. I thought that was the best parts of the episode. I don't know. All I could say about this episode is that it was a lot of fun. And before the podcast, I asked you if you're enjoying this show more than Andor, which is probably the most highest rated Star Wars show ever made. Maybe, I don't know. Like all I hear from people about that show is how great it was, and it fell off for me. I'm personally loving the show way more than Andor because of how fun it is. And I noticed something very particular in this episode of one small criticism I'll give to it is I found what Anakin was kind of trying to teach Ahsoka a little bit esoteric. I couldn't really figure out what she was learning from him. And maybe
Mhm.
I would love to get your impression of that because you're more familiar with their dynamic with Clone Wars and stuff like that. But one thing I did notice is right after that event, one, Ahsoka started wearing lighter clothes. Like her entire
Yes.
uh, wardrobe kind of switched to more light side kind of stuff, but her personality really changed after that. You see a lot more of young Ahsoka in that character of like the more upbeat kind of jokey a little bit, like not the very stoic kind of serious that she was at the beginning of the show. And I thought that that was really cool because that was the exact opposite of what we saw in Andor. Andor, the further it got on, the more serious and the more dark it got. This show is doing the exact opposite, where we're seeing Ahsoka kind of get a little bit more lively and a little bit more fun. And yeah, I had a ton of fun with this show. I thought it was a great episode. But yeah, what was your opinion on it, and how do you feel about Ahsoka changing over time?
um, yeah, I would say, as I said before, I like this more than Andor,
Mm-hmm.
but Andor was great. I loved Andor. And coming into this, I'm a I love the Clone Wars. Yeah, I love the animated Clone Wars done by Dave Filoni. I love Star Wars Rebels. So this show was very much like for me. Ahsoka's one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character in Star Wars. So the fact that there's like a live action Ahsoka and we're getting all these characters and stories that I'm familiar with, amazing. Once again, spoiler, if you haven't watched episode 5, what are you still doing listening to this, but there are a lot of flashbacks. One to yes, she's with Hayden Christensen as Anakin, but there's flashbacks to the Clone Wars
Mhm.
where we have a live action depiction of the Clone Wars, which is something I didn't really think I would see, didn't expect to see, but when it happened, I was like, this is amazing. And we have a young Ahsoka, which is also amazing. And just a little, I was like a little fun fact: the girl who plays young Ahsoka is the same one who plays young Gamora in Avengers Endgame
Oh,
or Infinity War. Infinity War,
anymore.
yeah. Which I mean, for nerds, cool, like cool little Easter egg. She's playing a younger version of some of these like favorite characters in series and TV shows and movies. But yeah, the fact that there was a flashback to Clone Wars battles and we see Anakin and Ahsoka together, I thought very cool to see. Very cool fight scenes to see also. Yeah, I liked a lot about this episode. I've been loving a lot about this series. And speaking on Ahsoka kind of growing and changing, that's one thing that we've seen throughout the series, right? Is that she is the master, at least in terms of her and Sabine Wren. She's the
Mhm.
master, Sabine's the apprentice. But even throughout this series, like we see her growing and learning new things. Like even, in the battle on their way to the planet, like her and Sabine are butting heads. Like, oh, it's like one wants to do things one way, one wants to do things the other way. And it's only once they come together and they're like, all right, you tell me what you need from me. I'm gonna tell you what I need from you. We're gonna work together, we're gonna compromise. And that's how they ended up being successful in their battle.
Yeah.
And then even in this fight with Anakin, yeah, it's hard to tell exactly what he was trying to teach her, and maybe I'll need to rewatch it a few times to really, you know, figure out, I guess, what it was. But it seems like the lesson she learned was she doesn't need to try and like fight things so much. She needs to be more accepting of the force, I guess.
Mhm.
Needs to be, as you said, maybe a little bit more lighthearted because it seemed like she was trying to force her way through things as opposed to just letting things, letting the force and letting things come to her. And after she has her battle, and as she said, she's wearing lighter clothing and lighter garbs. She's not wearing, almost the dark Sith robes, but then she has this communication with the Purgle, right? The space whales, the hyperspace whales. And then they fly their ship into the mouth of this hyperspace whale. So it's okay, we're being very open to what the force, to what nature has given us. And then we're gonna allow these whales to take us wherever. Even what Ho Yang says, where are these whales going to take us? And she's like, I don't know. Hope it's somewhere that we want to go,
Yeah.
which is very like, very go with the flow. Obviously, you don't have
Very
no idea where
Qui-Gon.
this very Qui-Gon. Yeah. So she definitely has grown as the series has progressed. And it's something, yeah, it's cool to see. It's nice to see that the character is developing. She's not just, this omnipotent being. She's still learning and still growing, growing with Sabine and then also learning from Anakin, which once again, amazing to see Hayden Christensen again. But yeah, overall, I'm loving the series. Great episodes so far, and definitely looking forward to next week too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm right there with you of like each after each episode I'm very excited for the next, which is something I think Disney Plus has struggled doing with me. A lot of times I'm usually dissatisfied with the episode that I just watched and I'm like, oh, this was too short or this didn't really end in the right place. I don't understand what's going on here. I think every single episode of this show so far has ended in a great place and has been really satisfying. And I haven't really cared about. This is actually an episode where I didn't even look at what the length was. Um,
Mhm.
and I still had a great time all the way throughout. And going back to like what she might have learned from Anakin in that whole sequence, the only thing I can really think of or what I was thinking of at the time was maybe the reason why she was so rigid was afraid of what Anakin became and kind of being a little bit more conservative of like, oh, I'm afraid that, something might lead to the dark side. If I
Hmm.
train Sabine the wrong way, or if something happens where I let myself lose control, potentially can go to the dark side. But I think what's so great about this episode is after Return of the Jedi, even before after Return of the Jedi, during Return of the Jedi, Vader and Anakin go back to the light side and destroy the Emperor, right? That was like the whole redemption arc. And we really haven't seen anything pay off from that since. And I'm glad that we kind of got to see no, Anakin really did come to the light side. Even as a Force ghost, he's, still alive in the Force and can still do a lot of teaching to even these older well-established Jedi-like characters, which is really really cool. And I hope we see more of that from Star Wars going forward.
Yeah. So I did make a prediction video before this episode. It, I mean, I would say I'm for the most part like still alive with my predictions.
Mhm.
I think I said one thing was we weren't going to see Thrawn yet. We didn't haven't seen Thrawn yet. I said that Zeb Aurelius is going to make an appearance before the end of the season. So hey, still got 3 more episodes, Zeb, to make me look like I'm smart. But then one thing I said, I think my bold prediction, I said Ahsoka was going to change something in the Force, or it's change something in time because there like time travel is something that's possible, and she did go back to the past, but didn't change anything. And I kind of hoped to see Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan Jarrus, which we didn't see. So I'd say 2 out of 3 predictions are still possible. My prediction for this next episode, I think we're still not going to see Thrawn. I think because this episode completely focused on Ahsoka and her being in, the world between worlds, and then Hera and, the crew looking for her. I think now this next episode is going to focus on, okay, Sabine and Morgan and them traveling through hyperspace.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it is actually going to deal with, Sabine coming to terms with, okay, she she's not on the dark side, right? But she
Yeah.
gave the map to the Jedi. She gave the map to Morgan. So her coming to terms with like, I want to see my friend Ezra, but I've also helped them in a way bring back Thrawn. So I think I, I don't think we're gonna see Ahsoka in this episode at all, really. If we're talking about balance between one episode, all Ahsoka, this next episode, if we're balancing things, should be no Ahsoka, even though the series is called Ahsoka. So that'd be kind of weird if there wasn't any Ahsoka.
Mhm.
But I think this is gonna be all around Sabine Wren, and Morgan and Balon Skull. But I still don't think we're gonna see Thrawn.
I don't want this to you know disrupt your great prediction record so far, but I have a couple of questions of what you think might happen. One, do you think Ahsoka and Sabine have a situation where they get back together and she actually trains her properly, allows them to kind of defeat, you know, Balin and his apprentice? But more importantly, do you think they stop Thrawn, or does Thrawn come back?
I think Thrawn comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I don't know. I th- yeah, it's different. It's difficult to say. I really don't know, and I think it's either he's gonna come back at the very end, or right at the very end they're gonna do something to stop him from coming back in like the final episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's what's gonna happen. But I kind of wanna, yeah, I kind of want to leave it up to the show.
Yeah.
I don't want to predict too much into it. Like, okay, yeah, obviously I'm making predictions, but I feel like these are smaller, inconsequential things. Like, oh, it'd be cool to see this, it'd be cool to see that. So I don't want to think too much about whether or not they Thrawn comes back or not. But if I had to guess, I would assume that he does.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
I'm with you. I have no idea. And I think that's kind of really cool of being able to have like a Star Wars world where you don't know what's going to happen and there's a lot of speculation. I feel like there was a lot of that in The Force Awakens where we were kind of like, oh, who's Snoke and like who's pulling the strings and all that stuff, and like all these really cool mysteries that we just wanted the answers to that we never got.
Hmm.
Um, and like the Knights of Ren and all like this really cool stuff. I think you could do a lot here. Uh, with that as well because we have no idea what's going to happen. Does Thrawn come back? Does he? Do they maybe like end up seeing Maybe it's not just one Star Destroyer, but maybe it's a fleet of Star Destroyers that ended up getting stranded there.
Mm.
Who knows? But it's like one of those things of you don't know who's going to win, you don't know who's going to lose, you don't know what's going to happen, and that's what makes this show, I think, even more fun than um, a lot of other stuff, especially because we already know what happens after this. Like we
Yeah.
know the story after this, so the fact that it's still an unknown, even though we know what happens, is really fun.
Yeah. I think that's the cool thing about all of this, right? About all the stuff that's happening in Star Wars now. It's like technically we know how the story ends,
Yeah.
and they're really just filling in stuff in the middle. But they're new stories that we haven't seen before. For the most part, haven't seen before. Yeah, so I definitely appreciate like these new stories with old characters, or yeah, if that makes sense.
So I guess my I guess final question would be, clearly Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor are interested in still doing Star Wars stuff.
Hmm.
Do we get to see more of them? Do they show up in maybe Rey's movies? Do we get to see more of characters that are ingrained in Star Wars overall? Do we get to see more Luke? Maybe Luke's now with the Force, and we get to see him as a Force ghost. Do we see a lot of these older characters going forward, or do you think maybe this was just for this project? They really liked what the story that Dave Filoni was trying to tell here, and they joined up for that. But other than that, maybe we don't see them much anymore.
I think we see them, but I think it's just gonna be Force Ghosts, like you
Hmm.
said.
Yeah,
Maybe we get like a couple flashbacks. That'd be pretty cool.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't think we get like full on stories with them. I think if anything, it's flashbacks like we got for this Ahsoka episode, and maybe even just like a Force Ghost floating around. But yeah, I do think we see them at some point.
Yeah, that would be cool. Either way, I think what this show has done has been really fun, and
Yeah,
like you, I can't wait for the next episode.
nice.